Hello again my viewers, and welcome to Brazil. Now, just like my last video, which is this one, but this time I'll be making a how-to guide for Brazil in TNO. Just like last time, there will be spoilers, so you have been warned. Now moving on, not only am I going to be doing a simple guide on the Brazilian state, but I'm also going to be doing a quick guide on this guy over here. However, I'm only going to be doing the normal democratic path and not the 100 days crisis because I haven't done it yet, so I don't know what's the best action to take. To start off, we'll be talking about the mechanics of Brazil, like developing your country, mega projects like the Trans-Amazon Highway, then Senate and presidential elections and the South American Cold War, and finally mechanics for Carlos Lacerda. And just a heads up, I will also be talking about the crisis events that will happen later in the game. Now, first things first, when you load up Brazil and you go to your decisions tab, you can see that there's a power struggle between the vice president and the president of Brazil. And if you don't want to deal with the 100 days crisis, then make sure that the relations between the two is high. Then moving on, we have the Brazilian army. Now, it's important to keep loyalty as high as possible, otherwise there's a chance that he might coup you if it's too low. So to make sure that this doesn't happen, make sure you spend political power to keep it as high as possible. Then finally we have army corruption, in which if it's high enough then it will give you debuffs, so you want to spend political power as well to make sure to keep it low, because the lower it is, the less debuffs you'll have. Next thing to mention is the development and the election system of your country, in which if you click this icon right here, it will give you a new UI development screen which allows you to turn your nation from backwater agrarian economy to an industrial powerhouse. When you click these decisions, which will cost 10 political power, you can develop your nation by sponsoring industry, which will increase GDP growth. Then next you have encourage immigration to seas, which will give you more building slots. And finally we have mechanization, which will help to grow your population and economy. However, out of these 4 decisions, I recommend that you don't click this one because this actually decreases your development, but it will give you extra cash, but I don't recommend it because it's pointless in the end. Because you want to make sure they help to develop your nation and the economy for long-term economic growth. After that, if you click on this icon right here, you will be able to see your mega projects like the Trans-Amazon Highway, which every month the progress bar will actually increase bit by bit until the project's eventually completed. And you can increase this progression by clicking on this icon, which will add more production units to speed up the progress. But this will make the projects more expensive, so you have been warned about that. Finally, as for these rhombus-like shapes, every single time the progression meter reaches one of them, you'll get a slight boost. For example, like maybe extra GDP growth, maybe extra development, and maybe reduction in poverty, and also more. And now it's time to move on to the presidential and Senate election. Moving on, we'll be talking about the elections now. First off, we have the Senate, which is pretty simple. All you just need to do is just to win as many states as you can by campaigning in them. And the more states you have, the more votes you'll have. And lastly, we have the presidential elections, which I recommend clicking on this icon right here when campaigning, because this will help you to win the elections in the long term. Also, just quick tip, if you actually meet the GDP quota right here, then what will happen, it will actually give you an election boost to the current party that was in charge. As for the voting system, I need to mention that every single time that you try to pass a bill, it goes through this system, where you need to get a certain number of seats approved to pass it. And if one of these dots right over here goes into that green box over there, then what will happen is that the bill will be able to pass. The next thing I need to mention about is the construction of a nuclear bomb, where you get to invest your state's budget into a nuclear development project. However, make sure it's not too high at the start of the game, because most likely your economy will go into a deficit. Also, if you win the South African proxy war, then what will happen is that the nation of South Africa will help to boost your project speed. The last mechanic I want to go over is the party loyalty, in which you need to keep your party as loyal as high as you can, because what will happen is that some of your senators could fall to other parties, which I'm not sure what will happen because it never happened to me throughout my playthrough. But however, I think what happens is that maybe they won't support some of your bills, even if it favours your party's interest. Now, to make sure that remains high, if you scroll down a bit over to where these little decisions are, what you can do is that you can spend political power on some of them that'll increase party loyalty. Also, so you can see you have a political like compass right over here, where what will happen is that if you lean too far to one side, then you'll be able to get buffs that support that side. And that'll be all. Now, moving on, we're going to be talking about proxy wars. To start off, if you click this icon right over here, you can open the South American Cold War UI. As you can see, there's a power balance mechanic between Brazil, which is you, and Argentina. Not only that, but you can see which countries side with who when you hover over them. Not only that, but each country will actually be highlighted in different colours to actually mark if they support Brazil, which is dark green, or Argentina, which is light blue. And throughout the Cold War in South America, the more proxy wars you win in, the more countries will side with you, which are Bolivia, Paraguay, Colombia, and finally French Guiana, who you can annex later on. To start, your first proxy war will actually be about Bolivia, which you need to sway to your side in the Cold War against Argentina. As you can see, you have 5 rounds of negotiations, and you need majority of them to win without tensions going too far, or it can cause you to fail. And to win each round, all you need to do is to gain more influence than Argentina to win the round. As you can see with this tug of war detail right here, and after when you win majority of the rounds, what will happen is that Bolivia will join your side. Next, the second proxy war is about securing Bolivia to your side during the mining wars. Which, if the government isn't dominating during these wars, then what will happen is that you'll lose Bolivia, making them a neutral country once again during the Cold War. However, luckily most of these decisions that you can see right here don't actually cost you much political power. However, the problem is that they are actually limited, so you can only take 2 at a time, just like how with the last proxy war you can only take 3 decisions at a time. So to win the proxy war and to secure Bolivia to your side, what you need to do is to have majority of these factions supporting you, which I recommend to stay with these 3 over here because they're already on your side, so if you can just hold your ground and keep them to your side, then victory is guaranteed. And what will happen in the end is that after you win the proxy war, Bolivia will actually become your puppet state. Alright, so now we're going to be talking about the South African War. Which is simple, just help them to win against, the Germans, and in return they'll help you to boost nuclear developments. But however, I'm not sure if you need total victory or just have them survive. Now late in the game, as soon as you have the Crow elected, what will happen is that French Guiana will basically have an independence referendum. And if you win the election by having more voter turnout, what will happen is that the state will then join Brazil in 2 years. However, if you lose, they just become an independent state. First things first, what you need to do is to lower the anger of the population, which in return, this will actually help to slow down the independence referendum. Then after that, you just need to boost the pro-Brazilian movements. By the way, I'm just assuming that you need to keep 40% of the legitimacy, because if you don't, then you may lose it. Now moving on, the other proxy war I need to talk about is the Paraguayan Bush War that happens during the South African War. And what we need to do during the proxy war, our goal is to help the communists, which are these guys over here, to overthrow the fascist governments that have control. However, if we fail and the government still stands, then what will happen is that the country will remain sided with Argentina. So, by funding these rebels, we can actually help to oust the fascist government, but however, the thing is that the communist forces actually divided between themselves and the liberals. And if the liberals are strong enough after the government is taken over, and not the communists, then what will happen is that Paraguay will join your side. However, if these guys remain divided or nationalistic, then what happens is that the country will flip to communism. And in the end, it will actually lead Paraguay to become a neutral nation, so I guess it's a partial victory because they ain't sided with Argentina, but isn't really a total victory. So, if you want total victory, make sure you have 3 regions under control and make sure that the government stability is low, because that'll help for communists to survive longer. Also, it's important to say that you need to delay mobilization as long as you can, because what will happen is that if it succeeds, then you'll lose. And also, make sure you don't do anything sometimes, because what will happen is that the liberal faction will increase. Then as soon as it says that the faction is majority aligned with the liberals, you can then take over the 4th state and the government will collapse, replacing it with a pro-Brazilian one. Finally, the last proxy war we need to talk about is the Colombian Civil War, which you just need to support either the revolutionaries or the government, and then just have the state you sided with win. But because I'll be supporting the OFN, I'll be backing the Reds. However, unfortunately, this is where I make a very stupid mistake by sending one awful infantry unit with barely any helicopters, and also 2 tank units for some reason. Which, if you haven't guessed, sending tank volunteers to a mountainous jungle terrain with no supply is a very bad thing.
두 번째 게임은 설탕 뽑기입니다. 선택하신 모양은 여러분이 뽑아야 할 모양입니다.
However, fortunately, I did manage to win the Civil War by attacking weaker units, so like militias for example. And then, as for gaps, I just simply drove right through them, and then just captured key cities for the enemy factions to capitulate. Okay, so now that we've covered all the proxy wars, we're gonna be moving over to the playthrough now. However, it will be short because I don't want the video to be too long. But don't worry, I'll make sure to cover everything I can. Now, once you get the crow in charge after winning the election, what will happen is that you'll get his tree now, which will look like this. As you can see, the tree is divided into different sections, like how this part allows you to join the OFN faction and to support the US in their proxy wars. Now, down here to the left of the focus tree, you can see how this part, more specifically, is to help to develop the agrarian economy of Brazil. And then you have the far left, which is to help to kickstart industrial development and to repair Rio. Not only that, but these parts actually help you to develop not only Brazil's economy, but also to develop the states. Then we have this side of the focus tree, which allows you to tackle corruption by passing an anti-corruption bill. And below that, on the right hand side, you can see that this will help with medical advances, while on the right side is to basically boost Brazilian education. Finally, we have the centre part of the focus tree, which allows you to modernise and develop the Brazilian army. In the end, I must warn you that you can't complete every focus because something will happen later in the game that will basically lock you out for the rest. So just make sure that you're choosing the focuses that matter to you. Later in the game, you'll encounter a short crisis right here, which is when this city will go into a full-on riot and you need to crush it. Now during this, there will be decisions like this one that you need to click, and if you click the right one, what will happen is that this will lessen the effects of the negative national spirit. And don't worry, it won't last forever, even though it doesn't say when it ends. Trust me, it does eventually disappear during the epilogue. Finally, the last major crisis you need to complete is near the end of the game, which is this one right here, right after you dissolve the Workers' Rights Bill. After which your nation will be affected by having mass riots. Now there are 2 ways to end this. Now you have the right side of the focus tree which focuses on negotiations, then you have the left side of the focus tree which focuses on crushing them. As for the fastest way to end the riots as fast as possible, you need to try and focus on getting your supporters to 75% in power of the situation to finally end the riots. And to make sure you don't let your party's support fall, because otherwise your character can face impeachment. Also, if you want to negotiate with them, then just simply do this, but however, I must warn you that I can't help you more than that. And the reason why is because that every single time I try and do it, I always fail, so because of that, I just simply crush them in the end. After reaching the last part of the Crow's path, all that's left now is just to help to get his successor into office, and after that you'll finally get the ending. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below.